Hey guys, Grandy Tamias here, and welcome to my full, spoiler-filled review for Sonic the Hedgehog 3. We did it, guys! I know I said it in the last video that it didn't matter, but Sonic 3 beat Mufasa! Yeah! F*** you, Disney! Okay, in all seriousness, if you haven't seen my preconceptions and first thoughts video, I recommend doing that, as although a lot of what I said ended up being wrong, one of the bigger things that I talked about had to do with the thought process behind how the filmmakers adapted the lore of Sonic. And in some ways, the movie kind of proves it right, and is surprisingly tight with continuity. Except for one thing, but I'll get to that. Shadow's story is adapted very faithfully from the games in terms of its tone and meaning, though some smaller elements are changed, like removing Maria's terminal illness and setting the backstory in a military base instead of the space colony arc. It fits in seamlessly with what has been established previously regarding aliens from Sonic's world being on Earth, and gives a justification for why Eggman didn't know about his family in the first movie. Gerald was in prison, and without any other family, Eggman was left on his own to become a genius with a twisted view of the world. And for 110 years old, Gerald actually didn't age too bad, though I guess he had a genius way of figuring out how to live for that long. I also got right that Commander Walters would play a more significant role. He doesn't get a whole lot more screen time than he did in the second movie, since he does end up dying, but I did get right that he knew that Shadow was dangerous firsthand, as we see a younger version of him working at the military base where Project Shadow was being conducted. And the fact that Shadow had a grievance against Walters to the point of super punching Tom disguised as him was actually kind of clever. Though the moment before that where Tom uses the disguise to trick Director Rockwell was absolutely predictable, as was Tom's recovery. I saw those a mile away, but more on that later. The only thing that doesn't line up continuity-wise is something that I mentioned way back in my gun conspiracy video. I'm gonna play a clip from the second movie that establishes the fact in question. I might have to edit it for copyright reasons, but here it is.
After the events in San Francisco, a global task force was created, devoted to protecting our planet from alien threats. That day, Guardian Units of Nations was born.
Now, I don't have footage from the trailers and TV spots of Sonic 3 to prove this yet, but I have seen this movie twice, and I know that the abandoned military base, which is later said to take place in Colorado, had a gun logo on the giant steel doors. And in the flashback when Maria dies, the soldiers have gun logos on their helmets. Remember, that scene takes place in what is likely the early 70s, as evident from the Vietnam-era style of helmets that they're using, as well as other dated things like the record player, the vintage toy robot that Eggman picks up, and the old monster movie that Shadow and Maria watch, which has a creature that resembles the Bio-Lizard. So how could Gun have existed back in the 70s if Commander Walters said that Gun was created after the events of San Francisco in the first movie, set in the early 2020s? Also, I'm not sure how long it would take to construct a building like the Gun HQ along the River Thames, but it's unclear whether it existed before the San Francisco incident. None of this is such a big deal that it breaks the movie universe, but I kind of expected better, seeing as how Pat Casey and Josh Miller wrote all three of these movies. In the unlikely event that either of them are watching, especially Pat since I know he's active on Twitter, I apologize for having to call them out like this. But I like to be thorough when I make a complaint, and that often involves analyzing chronologically what the filmmakers intended. I also think it's kind of weird that the song that they use in the montage of Shadow and Maria at the military base is End of the Line by the Traveling Wilburys, which came out in 1988, when the sequence is, like I said, set in the early 70s. To be fair, it does sound like a 70s song, but they show Maria putting a 45 on the record player at the beginning of the scene, so the implication, to me at least, was that that was the song being played within the scene. Getting back on track, I will say that I am pretty intrigued to learn more about Shadow's backstory. We see him crash to Earth in a meteor, but why? Why was he encased in a rocky cocoon? Did he make the cocoon from his body like the big chap xenomorph in Alien Romulus? That's what it reminded me of. Side note, I saw that movie a couple months ago, and it was pretty good. And that ending, though, it mentally f***ed me up. But yeah, it would be kind of gross if these Sonic World aliens can generate their own cocoons to survive long periods in space, which is something I'll get back to. Aside from teleporting, he's pretty much functionally the same as Sonic the Hedgehog in that they can both generate chaos energy from their quills. So I wonder if all that other stuff could potentially be explained in a sequel if the films introduce the Black Arms. Because they never say that he isn't genetically linked to them, Since Gerald didn't create Shadow in this continuity and never met the Black Arms, my speculation is that they created Shadow using the genetic material of an alien hedgehog from Sonic's world, as well as their own. For what purpose, we don't know, but I think that this would be a good way to link in more of that cosmic lore of Sonic like I talked about in previous videos. Oh, and as for why Shadow didn't say anything about the Black Arms during the movie, that could potentially be explained as him having amnesia after his crash landing to Earth, which has happened in the games. Another prediction of mine that ended up coming true in an ironic way was seeing Sonic pissed off. I mean, we've seen his serious side in the previous two movies, but here, it's up to a whole nother level, and I love it. He even becomes an asshole to the people that he loves, like Wade, when he takes the Master Emerald from him. Not like this kind of asshole, but... actually, yeah, I just realized just now, just like that kind of asshole, because they both sought out the Master Emerald with the intent to use it for violence. And yes, I had to bring that up one last time, since this is my last Sonic video. But it makes Sonic a flawed character, and not just the always cocky hero who goes in and out of every battle with a smile and knows when to hold back and show mercy. Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles' reaction to Eggman still being alive also confirms that, in the second movie, Sonic had the intent to kill Eggman after he defeated the Death Egg robot. Or at the very least, Sonic had no regret in letting him fall to his seeming demise. I know that got a lot of people talking after the second movie came out, and whether it's really within Sonic's character to let someone die if not causing it himself, and it reminded me of the discussion about the Michael Bay Optimus Prime being a violent character. I think that, in theory, the kills Optimus makes in those movies are justified given the tone, but they sometimes go overboard with how he expresses that intention. Sonic is obviously meant to be more family-friendly, but I really like seeing a different side of the character where he struggles to control his emotions and takes action because of things done to him personally. I think that was executed very well here with how he almost went down the same dark path that Shadow did, and how that ties into the lesson that Tom was trying to teach him. Anyway, I brought all that up because it reminded me that Sega has a mandate for the comics that Sonic cannot show an excessive amount of emotion. And this movie proves that's total bullshit. Not only can you have a good story where Sonic fights an enemy because they triggered an emotional response in him, it actually makes the story better. Something that I intended to bring up in the previous video, but didn't because I didn't know where else to put it, is something that I actually realized a while back, but I thought about it more again after it was revealed in the trailers that Gerald Robotnik was still alive. Both adventure games are about Sonic & Co. resolving a conflict set up by an old man long after he has died, and the old man has a young girl figure in his life who helps others find peace and happiness, and she befriends a creature who has violent tendencies. I mentioned earlier how the movie was predictable at times, like the Commander Walters disguise, even though I was surprised that they killed him, and there were a few other moments like that, such as when Sonic was about to kill Shadow but doesn't, kind of like the Martha scene in Batman vs. Superman. And Sonic admitting early on in the movie that he's not great with the teamwork thing, I knew that was going to rear its ugly head later. But just because a movie is predictable doesn't mean it's bad. And I think some of these moments were used to good effect. Like, I thought Sonic and Shadow making amends was much better than the Martha scene, and their rivalry before that was well developed. It's pretty much exactly what I wanted the conflict between Sonic and Pachacamac to be. The only difference being that Longclaw's death was certain, allegedly, so it would have been all the more tense wondering if Sonic had actually moved on from that loss. Oh, but Chief Pachacamac died too, but I'm speaking hypothetically as if he survived because I already explained why killing the Echidna tribe was a bad decision. Getting back on track again, another change to Shadow's backstory that I thought was interesting was having Maria be killed by an explosion instead of a direct gunshot. There was still shooting involved, but Walters stopped one of the soldiers from shooting Maria. Instead, he accidentally caused a stray shot that ruptured one of the Chaos Energy canisters, and it was probably the most PG way that they could have handled this death, and I'm definitely alright with it, as it still gets the point across as to why Shadow was traumatized. I was going to save it for later, but I guess now's a good time to mention it. Eggman's death. I'm convinced that he is dead because Jim Carrey, as I explained in the previous video, and neither the mid nor post-credit scenes imply that he's still alive. In the Sonic 2 mid-credit scene, I think Agent Stone's presence clearly hinted at Eggman still being alive. I mean, he'd have no purpose to sneak around Gunn otherwise since he's so devoted to the Doctor. And like I said, I think that the third movie is a good place to end Eggman's story, and we can finally get some new villains to make the next few sequels feel fresh. I really hope that Eggman's death isn't retconned in the next movie because it would undermine the development that he had. We really don't need him to pull a Loki. Right before his death, though, they did resolve the plotline between him and Agent Stone, which, okay, we all knew what they were implying in the previous two movies, but in this one, they skirted around it in the cheapest way possible. But I get that these movies have to market themselves to countries who may not like that sort of thing, so that's unfortunate. And while I'm still talking about that scene, the moon getting sliced amounted to pretty much nothing but a reference. It could have just as easily been a random satellite, and that actually would have been better. Like, they could have easily had a bit where the scene cuts to a random family watching TV and the satellite goes out. That'd be pretty on brand for these movies, and maybe a joke on top of that about switching from satellite cable to streaming. Oh well, at least they didn't say anything akin to pissing on the moon, though I guess Eggman did make an announcement before he saved the world. But the fan dub was definitely referenced when Sonic associated Shadow with Hot Topic. How did I know that'd be something Movie Sonic would say? It's fine, it's whatever, I can live with it. On that note, a lot of the comedy was weaker than the previous two films. There were a few jokes that were pretty good, like the callback to Sonic's line in SA2 when he jumps out of the gun helicopter, Eggman's jab at the terrible 2011 Green Lantern movie, and Maddie smacking Tom for eyeing up director Rockwell when she was disguised as her. I can't say I blame Tom, her actress was Jessica Jones and Jesse Pinkman's girlfriend. Too bad in the latter show her time was pretty short for reasons you'll know if you've seen Breaking Bad. Let's just say her character ascended and never came down. Also, is director Rockwell supposed to be like the movie version of Topaz from Sonic X? But a lot of the other jokes just fell flat for me, like the meta humor that Ivo and Gerald Robotnik were in a movie being played by the same actor. That was the most obvious joke they could have made. And they brought back Rachel. Oh god, they brought back Rachel. Granted, it's not the actual Rachel, but it's, just Maddie disguised as her, but it was totally unnecessary. Besides, I liked her actress better in Wonka. That movie made much better use of Natasha Rothwell. I am very glad, though, that they used actual music from the video games this time, especially Live and Learn. At first, they had the slow guitar melody when Shadow had that dream memory of Maria playing it for him, but later on, they used the actual original version of Live and Learn from SA2 when Sonic and Shadow team up and go super. That was such an epic moment. Also, Sonic filmmakers, can we please, please, please get Undefeatable from Sonic Frontiers to play for the Supersonic scene of the next movie? Please? Also, I wonder what happened to the Chaos Emeralds after this movie. Shadow was the last one to use the super form after Sonic lost his and started falling towards Earth. So, does he still have them? Oh, and they really need to have Tails and Knuckles get their movie super forms too, because I'm tired of this only male hedgehogs can go super thing. F*** that mandate. And I want the super version of Amy in the next movie too. Okay, now I can finally get to my biggest problem. This movie establishes that aliens from Sonic's world, or Mobians, or whatever you want to call them, don't need any protection or respiratory equipment to exist in the vacuum of space. And they can withstand the extreme temperatures of atmospheric re-entry, which, for reference, is approximately 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit or 2,700 degrees Celsius. See, I can be a genius like the Robotniks too. Technically, none of this is new, as we've seen characters survive in space in the games, but that was due to video game logic. And to be fair, the meteor cocoon that I mentioned earlier could potentially explain Shadow surviving his first fall to Earth, and his second could have been due to him still being in his super form when he fell, again, much like in the games. And if they can withstand atmospheric re-entry, the threat of Sonic dying near the end wasn't so much from the heat, but rather the force of impact when he'd eventually hit the Earth without a super form. And maybe these aliens are able to withstand the irradiation of space. Fine. But that doesn't explain how Shadow and Sonic were able to have a conversation on the moon, since sound can't travel in a vacuum. It needs a medium like air, or better yet, a liquid or solid, in order to do so. I know it's just a movie, and I explained in the previous video that scientific accuracy isn't needed when the blue hedgehog could run at the speed of sound, but if they were going to be realistic enough as to give Sonic 2 eyes and finely textured fur in live action in a world with real humans, I'd think at least adherence to something as simple as space would have been a given. I have always been willing to accept, regardless of the medium, that superforms are impervious to space, kind of like Captain Marvel, due to the magical nature of the Chaos Emeralds. So, although my suspension of disbelief can go pretty far, I don't expect these kinds of details to be established for the sake of this film when the previous two didn't hint at this. Hopefully that justifies my complaint. Also, does anyone else find it weird that Shadow didn't drown in that stasis liquid without any respirator hooked up to him, yet Sonic nearly drowned in the previous movie? Backing up a bit to Shadow falling to Earth, that post-credit scene doesn't do a whole lot as it only shows him getting his inhibitor rings back, but at least we know that he's out there and we'll more than likely see him again in Sonic 4. Oh, and the fact that Shadow even thought to get his inhibitor rings implies that he doesn't have amnesia after that fall, as I don't think that he got the inhibitor rings before being experimented on by the military scientists, so he'd have to remember what they were for. As for my thoughts on Keanu Reeves voicing Shadow, he was just okay. Not bad, but I thought that his voice was a little too gruff and low energy for Shadow. I get that he isn't supposed to talk at a mile a minute like Sonic, but he should have some youthful spark to him. Especially since he was originally created with the late 90s and early 2000s teenage emo craze in mind. So I still would have gone with Aaron Paul. And I really hope that they don't keep casting A-listers to voice the now expanding cast of Sonic characters, because it's going to get expensive. I mean, Idris Elba was paid $3 million for this movie, and I felt that he was kind of sidelined. More so than Tails, which was surprising given what I said in the preconceptions video. Had it been me, I would have gone with David Harbour as Knuckles, Aaron Paul as Shadow, and now that we have Amy, Melissa Rauch. Seriously, her Bernadette voice from The Big Bang Theory would fit perfectly for Amy. I did get a comment a while back suggesting Anna Kendrick for Amy, and I had heard that tossed around online for years, mainly because she voiced another pink character who embodies love and happiness. I can see the vision there, so I wouldn't mind. Funny enough, though, Justin Timberlake... Oh wait, wrong photo. Justin Timberlake was considered for the role of Tom during pre-production of the first Sonic movie, but honestly, I think he'd have made a better Sonic than a Tom. Don't get me wrong, I love Ben Schwartz as the Blue Blur, but Justin also has that coolness factor to his voice. And given Sonic's history with music, I think having an actual singer and mixing in some sing-along elements to these movies would have been fun. And if Anna Kendrick were Amy, we could have had Branch and Poppy as Sonic and Amy. Which brings me to one of the last things that I want to talk about in this video, the mid-credits scene. We see that Sonic had overshot the goalpost in Montana and made it all the way to New York State, where he is ambushed by a squadron of Metal Sonics. This had me dropping my jaw, as not only do they look one-to-one with the video game version of the character, it also has some serious implications. The first one that I know a lot of people are thinking is that this suggests that Eggman is still alive after somehow surviving the explosion of the Eclipse Cannon, and that he built the Metal Sonics as he does in the games. But I disagree. I might be biased because of what I said earlier about wanting Eggman's death to be permanent, though I won't rule out that possibility of him still being alive. My hypothesis is that these Metal Sonics were created by a new villain who has a reason for building robots to copy Sonic. We know that there are other beings in the galaxy who potentially know about Sonic, as Tails was able to watch him from his home planet during the events of the first movie. And there were some like Pachacamac who sought out Sonic to use his power for evil. Plus, we know in the games that Eggman isn't the only entity capable of making robots, such as the Ancients with their Guardians and Titans, and Gun, who is already in this universe and has a sort of on and off relationship with Team Sonic. And as we see with them wanting control over the Eclipse Cannon, they would have a motive to replicate Sonic's power. I doubt it's either the Ancients or Gun, as it doesn't make sense with the sudden arrival of Amy. Yes, I will get to her reveal in a moment. Would it really make sense for Amy to just happen to be in that forest at the same time as Sonic, who was about to be attacked, or could she have been tracking the Metal Sonics who were tracking the real Sonic? Perhaps Amy could know where the Metal Sonics came from and who made them, but I guess we won't know until Sonic 4. But as for the reveal itself, I know I said in the preconceptions video that Silver was going to be the mid-credits scene sequel bait character, but out of a mix of personal want and what I think would have been likely for these movies, Amy was still my top contender. And I am glad that it turned out that way. Honestly, after they showed Metal Sonic, I thought that they were going to stop at that, but then the Pico Pico hammer came flying in, and of course I knew who it was going to be, but I couldn't believe it. The cloak was probably mainly for dramatic effect, but that, along with her levitating when she catches the hammer, seems to suggest that her interest in magic and tarot cards is carried over from the games, something that Sega has been pushing a lot in recent years. And I expect that Amy's design and even the events of the scene aren't final, as we saw Tails and Shadow's designs altered after their mid-credit scenes. And of course, Pachacamac got redesigned too. Heck, Shadow's reveal was completely redone so that instead of being bound by restraints in an ice-chilled capsule, he was suspended in liquid, as I mentioned earlier. But Amy's design already looks really good. And like Shadow in Sonic 2, she doesn't speak, so they more than likely haven't settled on a voice actress yet. Again, hopefully not an A-lister. And I really hope that Amy is not the only new character that the fourth movie is going to properly introduce. Given Cream's friendship with Amy, she could show up too. Though Rouge would be my other choice, as not only would it keep the synergy of introducing female characters, her skills as a spy and treasure hunter could be relevant to whatever the plot of the next movie ends up being. Way back in my Sonic 2 preconceptions, I said that without Amy, going straight to Shadow would have been the wrong move. Well, I will admit, I was proven wrong. As not only did Shadow fit right in when we only had Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles before this, the lack of other anthropomorphic characters really helped to not bog down Shadow's presence and backstory. Which was kind of my problem with Tails and Knuckles in the second movie. While Tails had a backstory, it wasn't that deep or play into his character much because so much time was spent establishing Knuckles and how his backstory influenced the main plot. And when you consider the games, most of the characters who aren't Knuckles or Shadow just show up between games with no introduction at all. And while you could argue that Tails detecting Sonic from his home planet may or may not count as a backstory, every other Mobian character in the movies so far has one, including Sonic. Obviously, there's only so much you can do in one movie's worth of time, but I have faith that the future movies will use it wisely on Amy, Metal Sonic, and whatever villain and other new characters show up next. So for my final verdict, this movie is also an 8 out of 10 for me, like I gave Sonic 2, but I'd actually bump that film down to 7.5 because some action moments that weren't the Supersonic scene have grown kind of stale, and Sonic 3's Supersonic and Super Shadow scenes are anything but stale. And with that, I will no longer be making Sonic videos. I know that may come as a disappointment for a lot of you, but I really want to refocus the channel on other things. But I do still care about these movies enough that I will watch future installments. I just don't want it to become an obligation, even though I have enjoyed making such videos. Anyway, feel free to let me know in the comments. What did you think of Sonic the Hedgehog 3? And what are your hopes for Sonic the Hedgehog 4? Don't forget that if you want to follow me outside of my videos, I have a Discord server and I'm on Twitter. Links to both are in the description. With all that said, I hope you enjoyed, have a nice day, and thank you for your time.